The neon glow of the afterburner bar bled across the night air like a wound in the desert, its light reflecting from the tired faces of men and women who had spent their lives dancing with death in the skies. Among them sat Major Sophia Hale, her posture sharp as a blade, her gaze locked on Captain Robert Hayes, who leaned lazily across the table. The bar smelled of stale beer and the faint tang of aviation fuel, the scent of pilots who lived more hours airborne than grounded. Around them, the laughter and noise of Friday night slowly drained away as the tension thickened like storm clouds gathering over the Nevada desert. Robert smirked with the arrogance of a man drunk on both whiskey and his own record. He had been boasting all evening about his upcoming deployment, his voice rising with every drink. He wore his flight suit half unzipped to reveal a faded rock band shirt beneath, a symbol of his carelessness and bravado. Sophia listened, her jaw tightening with each casual remark. She had heard all before, from the academy to training flights to briefings where she was praised in peacetime but doubted in war. Always the same refrain, that her skills would fade when real bullets started flying. She finally leaned forward, her eyes steady as steel. Her words sliced through the murmurs of the room. "You think I cannot handle Afghanistan because I am a woman." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air. Every head in the bar turned toward their table, the weight of 30 pairs of eyes pressing against her back. Robert only chuckled, tilting his drink in her direction as though he held some unspoken truth in his glass. "Look, Hale, you fly well enough in Nevada skies, but those mountains out there will eat you alive. One mistake, and you'll be nothing more than smoke in the wind." Sophia's knuckles whitened against the wooden table. Her entire career had been a series of such challenges, walls built in front of her only to be climbed, barriers of doubt and prejudice that she had shattered again and again. Yet here was another man ready to define her limits, another obstacle daring her to prove herself. She stood slowly, her 5'6" frame drawing the attention of the entire room. Her voice was calm, but carried fire within it. "Let's make this interesting, Robert. I will take the next deployment to Afghanistan. If I return with more successful missions than any pilot in this squadron, you will stand in front of everyone and admit that courage has nothing to do with gender. And when I succeed, you will apologize not just to me, but to every woman you have disrespected." The challenge was like a spark in dry grass. Robert grinned wider, drunk on pride. "And if you fail, if you wash out or die trying, I will have your resignation." The bar erupted into gasps and whispers. The squadron commander moved quickly to intervene, his face flushed with anger. But Sophia raised a hand to stop him. Her focus was locked entirely on Robert. "Do we have a deal?" she asked. Robert extended his hand across the sticky table, his expression twisting from amusement to something darker. "Deal," he muttered, his grip firm. The moment their hands met, the entire bar seemed to exhale, the bet sealed like a verdict handed down by fate. 3 weeks later, Sophia found herself strapped into a transport plane, the C-130 groaning as it cut through the clouds toward Bram Air Base in Afghanistan. Her gear was packed, her pride heavy in her chest, and a fire burned in her veins. The barroom wager that began in the haze of neon lights had transformed into something far larger, a promise not just to herself, but to every woman who had ever been told they could not. She stared out the small port window as dawn lit the jagged teeth of the Hindu Kush Mountains, their snow-capped peaks rising like walls of stone guardians. Unlike the smooth ranges of Nevada, these mountains seemed alive, hostile, eager to swallow intruders. The transport bucked violently as it began its descent. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom with forced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for tactical landing. Keep your gear secured." Mortar rounds whistled from unseen positions as the wheels screeched against the tarmac. One explosion tore the air 200 meters from the runway, the shock wave vibrating through the fuselage. The second blast was closer, lifting the transport momentarily before slamming it back down with a bone. Rattling thud, sparks flew through the interior as metal screamed in protest, and the acrid scent of burning fuel filled the air. Sophia unbuckled despite the shouts of the loadmaster. Her eyes had caught sight of wounded soldiers stumbling from a burning vehicle near the edge of the runway. Chaos engulfed the airfield, dust and smoke swirling under the dawn sky as incoming fire closed in with terrifying accuracy. She grabbed the arm of a young medic bleeding from the head and dragged him toward the lowering ramp. "Can you move?" she asked. He gasped through blood and grit. "Others cannot." She did not hesitate, sprinting across the tarmac into the storm of fire, her instincts guiding her, as if the world had slowed. 3 times she crossed the kill zone, each trip carrying another wounded soldier away from the flames. Each time the explosions fell closer, each time her determination never faltered. From across the airfield, a naval officer watched through his binoculars, his voice hushed with surprise as he asked who she was. The answer was simple: Major Sophia Hale, the name patch on her uniform. The officer lowered his binoculars, his tone quiet with an almost reluctant respect. "Maybe this one is different," he said. And as the dust settled and the base roared back to life with the crackle of gunfire fading into silence, Sophia stood beside an ambulance, her uniform torn in her hands. Shaking, blood, smoke, and dust clung to her like a second skin. Welcome to Afghanistan, she thought. Her true test had only just begun. The briefing room at Bram Air Base carried the weight of a tomb, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while the pilots sat in grim silence. Every face bore the shadows of yesterday's mortar attack, exhaustion etched into their features. Major Sophia Hale sat near the back, her body still aching from the strain of hauling wounded men from fire, but her eyes sharp and alert. She knew that Afghanistan was not simply a battlefield. It was a crucible, and today it would present her with a challenge no manual had ever prepared her for. Lieutenant Commander Michael Turner stepped forward, a laptop under his arm, his voice steady but clipped. The map projected on the wall revealed a narrow valley carved between mountains, its lines twisting like the throat of some ancient beast. Red markers dotted the screen, crash sites where aircraft had been swallowed whole. He called it the Valley of No Return, though the soldiers on the ground had another name for it: the Devil's Throat. The statistics were brutal: a floor at 8,000. Feet hemmed by peaks towering over 14,000, winds that shifted without warning, and Taliban fighters entrenched like ticks in the rocks above. It was a natural fortress, an aircraft that entered rarely came out. The footage he showed silenced the room further. Helmet camera video from an F-16 pilot filled the screen, the cockpit view shaking as the aircraft dove into the canyon. The pilot, a veteran with hundreds of missions, believed he could outfly both the terrain and the enemy. Sophia could hear his breath quick and shallow, his warnings blaring as the ground rushed toward him. One sudden gust of wind sealed his fate. The wing clipped stone, and the feed dissolved in a static. "No survivors," Michael said with quiet finality. He showed 2 more failed attempts, each ending in fire on the canyon floor, each a testament to how the valley demanded perfection but offered no margin for error. Sophia leaned forward, studying the images. Her mind dissected the terrain, calculating the possibilities that others overlooked. She had spent her life refusing to accept limits, and as she watched the doomed aircraft vanish into fire, something within her whispered that there had to be another way. The valley did not only threaten, it challenged. It dared her to look beyond the rulebook and imagine what no one else had yet tried. That night, she slipped from her bunk long after the base had fallen quiet. The stars blazed over the desert sky as she moved like a shadow across the flight line. Her 10 Thunderbolt sat waiting, a predator at rest, its broad wings and twin engines radiating power. She called this aircraft Retribution, its nose adorned with an angel wielding a sword of flame, painted by her crew chief. It felt less like a machine and more like a companion, a beast that demanded both respect and boldness. Sophia almost leapt when a voice cut the silence. Staff Sergeant John Torres stepped from the shadows, wrench in one hand, flashlight in the other. He looked her up and down, his eyes taking in the flight gear and helmet bag. He knew what she planned. His tone was firm. Flying without clearance is madness. If they catch you, both of us are finished. But Sophia's determination burned brighter than fear. She spoke with urgency. Pilots died because they thought they knew their limits. What if those limits were wrong? What if this bird can do more than the manuals admit? Torres had spent 15 years working on a 10S. Longer than Sophia had been flying them. He stared at her, weighing the fire in her eyes, then slowly nodded. There's a canyon system north of here, red rock, terrain like Afghanistan, but without enemy fire. If you're going to risk your life, that is where you should test it. His grin revealed a flash of gold. I have waited my whole career for someone crazy enough to try. If we do this, we do it right. For the next hour, they huddled over a tablet, sketching flight paths through jagged stone corridors, plotting angles that would push the A-10 to its breaking point. Torres explained how to adjust engine power to hug the ground, how to read the invisible fingerprints of the wind, how to turn danger into advantage. He leaned close as she climbed into the cockpit. Remember this, Hale. The brass says minimum safe altitude is 500 feet. I have seen the blueprints. This machine was built to fly. In the weeds, the question is not whether she can. The question is whether you can. The engines roared like thunder as Retribution came to life. The air trembled with its power. Sophia tightened her grip on the controls, her heartbeat matching the rising pitch of the turbines. Torres gave her a sharp salute from the ground. Bring her back in one piece, he said. She eased the throttle forward, the night swallowing her as the desert opened ahead. Retribution leapt into the darkness, cutting across the stars. Sophia dropped lower and lower until the desert floor seemed close enough to touch. The canyon walls loomed, shadows twisting into shapes that threatened to swallow her whole. Wind clawed at the aircraft, trying to rip her into stone, but her hands were steady, her eyes locked on the path. Every warning screamed at her. Every system begged her to climb, but she pressed on. The A-10 danced between stone towers, banking hard, riding air currents like a hawk. Sophia felt the machine become an extension of her will. Together they carved impossible lines through the dark canyon. She had found the edge of the envelope, and instead of shattering, she discovered there was more space beyond it than anyone had dared imagine. When she returned to base, her pulse still racing, Retribution's engines cooling in the dark, she knew the truth. The devil's throat could be flown. It demanded precision, instinct, and courage beyond the manual. But it could be done. She had glimpsed possibility where others saw only death, and that vision would soon be tested in fire. The alarm wailed across Bram Air Base long before dawn, red lights flashing down the corridors as Sophia Hale sprang from her bunk. Her muscles moved on instinct, pulling on gear, strapping the familiar weight of her flight suit and helmet bag. The air tasted of smoke and urgency, the kind that told every soldier that today lives were already being measured against seconds. The briefing room was chaos, maps glowing on the main display, voices clashing over radios. Colonel William Hayes stood at the front, his voice strained but firm. A SEAL team was trapped in the valley, 8 men cornered in the devil's throat, 3 already bleeding out, 47 minutes under fire and counting. Taliban fighters had the ridgelines locked, crossfires overlapping so perfectly that even the bravest ground charge would end in slaughter. Pilots crowded the room, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the images of the valley. The obvious options were all useless. Guided strikes from altitude would never punch through the rock overhangs that shielded the enemy. Standard attack runs had already cost lives. The silence thickened, every man and woman present haunted by the footage of aircraft tumbling into stone coffins. Captain Michael Harris, an experienced A-10 pilot with over 100 missions, finally broke the silence. He volunteered, his voice firm, but Michael Turner, the SEAL commander, cut him down instantly. I will not send another pilot to die in that valley. There is no other way, he said, but his voice cracked because he was speaking not from the front of the room, but over radio. He was there, trapped with his men. The desperation in his tone bled through the static. We are out of ammunition. Rodriguez is bleeding. We cannot hold. If someone does not come now, we die here. Sophia looked around at her fellow pilots, their eyes fixed on the floor, the calculations playing on their faces. The math was merciless. The valley too narrow, the winds too savage. Any attempt was suicide, but within her mind echoed Torres' words from the midnight canyon flights. The aircraft was built for this. The only question was whether she was. She stepped forward, her voice carrying above the whispers. I will take it. Hayes turned sharply, his face a mask of disbelief. "Hell, you've been here less than a week. This is no exercise." She held her ground, her voice steady. "I have studied that valley since I arrived. I know the terrain. I know what my aircraft can do. And I know that if no one acts, those men will die." Turner's voice crackled again, weaker now. "Whoever comes, come fast. We cannot hold much longer." The choice was no longer a matter of orders. It was a matter of conscience. Sophia turned and strode from the room, her decision already carved in stone. "Prep my bird," she told Torres. "We are going hunting." Engines roared on the flight line as retribution came alive beneath her hands. Colonel Hayes' voice thundered in her headset. "Major Hale, you are not cleared for takeoff. Shut down immediately." Security vehicles sped across the tarmac, lights flashing, closing in on her position. The tower pleaded in her ear, warning of court-martial, disgrace, the end of her career. But beneath the noise, another voice bled through, raw and desperate. "Turner's team, Rodriguez is down. Incoming fire. We are finished without air support." The gunfire and explosions echoed in the transmission, each sound another heartbeat slipping away. Sophia's decision was already made. Her hands moved with the certainty of instinct. Torres' voice reached her over intercom, heavy with emotion. "Bring those boys home." "Hale!" She shoved the throttles forward. Retribution roared down the runway, security vehicles shrinking in her mirrors. No turning back now. The base commander's threats vanished in a static as she switched frequencies, cutting herself off from all but the trapped men who needed her. The Hindu Kush rose ahead like jagged gates to hell, peaks catching the pale blush of dawn. The Devil's Throat waited within, a valley that had devoured seasoned pilots and mocked their courage. Her altimeter wound down as she descended, 20,000 feet, 15, 10, 8. The mountains crowded her cockpit, filling her view with stone and shadow. Warning systems blared terrain, pull up, but she silenced them with a calm flick of her fingers. Her hands gripped the stick as the canyon swallowed her. The air howled with violent winds, tossing retribution against the stone walls. She fought back with micro-adjustments, each movement a battle against physics. At 500 feet above the floor, she was already lower than anyone had dared. At 200, she was threading a needle between death and salvation. Turner's voice came through, strained but steady. "Fire from 3 positions. East Ridge, West Ridge, bunker at the northern end. They have us pinned." Sophia scanned her systems, plotting vectors. She asked them to mark with infrared strobes. In the valley below, faint lights winked through the chaos, tiny sparks of life clinging to hope. As the walls tightened, the first enemy fighters spotted her. Their weapons flashed, pouring fire down on the seals. But unprepared for a predator approaching at treetop level, Sophia's cannon thundered, the GAU-8 growling with fury. The first enemy gunner vanished in a burst of dust and smoke. The others shouted in panic, "Aircraft!" Tracer fire ripped through the air. RPGs streaked past her cockpit. The sky itself became a storm of death. Shrapnel pinged against her armor. One burst shredding her wing, but missing vital systems. Still she flew on, banking hard, her A-10 twisting around stone outcroppings with impossible precision. Her cannon roared again, shells the size of bottles turning rock and flesh into fire. The eastern ridge fell, the position erupting in secondary explosions as ammunition stores cooked off. But the western ridge was ready. Heavy anti-aircraft fire spat flame, rounds hammering against her fuselage. Warning lights glowed across her panel. Her right engine bleeding smoke. She hit suppression systems and pressed forward, teeth clenched, blood dripping down her face from shattered glass. The bunker loomed ahead, a fortress dug into stone, immune to strikes from above. But she was not above. She bore down on it at eye level, her cannon screaming, rounds ripping through the firing ports. Mavericks followed, warheads burrowing deep before detonating. The mountain itself seemed to explode, fire rolling skyward. The valley shook with the thunder of collapse, dust swallowing everything. Turner's team shouted in disbelief, but Sophia was already banking out, retribution bleeding fuel and fire. The fight was far from over, and her crippled machine still had one more run to make. Smoke curled through the cockpit as retribution limped across the canyon. her right engine coughing like a wounded animal. Sophia Hale glanced at her instruments. Every light glowing red, oil pressure gone, hydraulic fluid leaking, fuel bleeding out in a silver stream. By all reason, she should have climbed away, headed for the safety of the base, but reason had no place in the devil's throat. Not when 8 men still huddled beneath rocks, praying for salvation. The western ridge blazed with muzzle flashes, their heavy guns sweeping the valley floor with streams of fire. Each tracer streaked past her cockpit like angry comets. Sophia forced Retribution into a low dive, pressing her body into the seat. The jet wash kicked up clouds of dust as she roared barely above the ground. Her stick felt heavier with every movement, her muscles screaming as she fought the sluggish controls. Turner's voice crackled through the headset, urgent and raw. "Viper, your aircraft is on fire. You have to pull out." She swallowed the taste of blood in her mouth. "Negative. One more pass, and you are clear." She banked hard, Retribution shuddering like it was about to tear itself apart, but the target locked on her sight, the last stronghold that had pinned the SEALs for over an hour. The Taliban fighters were ready this time. Their weapons tracked her line. RPGs streaked from the rocks. One missile spiraled past so close that she saw its fins spinning before it struck stone and blossomed into fire. Shrapnel rattled off her fuselage, punching holes through armor. One burst shattered her canopy. Freezing air rushing in, slicing her cheek with shards of glass. But still she flew. Her cannon thundered one last time, each round slamming into the ridge, tearing stone and men apart in clouds of fire. The western position collapsed in a storm of dust, their guns silenced forever. Victory should have felt like triumph, but came at a price. Retribution groaned as her last engine finally failed. The turbines died with a grinding shriek. And suddenly she was a 30,000-pound glider tumbling through one of the most hostile valleys on Earth. "Mayday, mayday." She called over emergency frequency. "Viper 111, total engine failure, attempting escape from Devil's Throat." The canyon walls rose like teeth around her. The altimeter dropped fast. Airspeed bled away. If she stalled here, she would be nothing more than wreckage joining the others at the valley floor. She scanned ahead, her breath catching as she spotted a tributary canyon joining the main throat, a slight widening that offered her one chance. She pulled back on the stick, trading precious speed for altitude. Retribution groaned, fighting gravity. Every vibration warned her she was seconds from stall. The ridge line loomed ahead, impossibly high, a wall of stone that mocked her efforts. She whispered into the smoke-filled cockpit, "Come on, Retribution. Do not quit now." Sparks erupted as the belly scraped against rock, showering light across the dawn sky. The mountains seemed to claw at her, but somehow the titanium beast held. They cleared the ridge with less than 20 feet to spare, limping over the crest in an open sky. Sophia exhaled once, her chest heaving, but her fight was not over. She was still 12 miles from Bram, her fuel gauge bouncing on empty, fire trailing behind her wing. Bram Tower responded instantly. "Viper 111, you're cleared for emergency landing. Fire crews standing by. Can you maintain glide slope?" Her teeth clenched as she fought the stick. Negative, control sluggish, coming in hot. The airframe rattled beneath her hands, wanting to roll left. Her arm screamed with the strain of forcing it level. At 5 miles, she attempted to lower gear. Nothing responded. Hydraulics gone. Manual backup frozen. The realization hit her like another blow. She would have to belly land. 30,000 pounds of crippled metal sliding across concrete. She lined up with the runway, flames trailing behind. At 500 feet, she saw the fire trucks racing, foam flooding across the concrete. Emergency crews scattering to safety. The runway lights glowed like a final path through darkness. At 100 feet, she flared hard. Retribution slammed down in a shower of sparks, grinding steel against stone. The aircraft screeched across the tarmac, sparks spraying high into the sky as foam hissed under its belly. 3,000 feet later, it skidded to a halt, smoke pouring from every seam. Sophia sat still for a moment, her chest rising and falling. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled the canopy release, stumbling out onto the wing, her flight suit torn, blood streaking her face. fire crackling from the ruined machine behind her. Waiting for her were Turner and his men, dirt-streaked, bloodied, but alive. They gathered around, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Turner stepped forward, his voice quiet. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The words barely reached her through the roar of sirens and the pounding of her heart. She simply nodded, because anything else would have shattered the fragile moment. Within hours, grainy footage of her crippled aircraft sliding down the runway spread across military networks. Pilots whispered to the woman who had flown through the devil's throat and lived. Commanders debated her insubordination, even as others hailed her as a savior. In the Pentagon, generals watched in stunned silence as the impossible became real. Yet as Sophia sat in the medical ward, stitches pulling tight against her cheek, she felt no triumph, only the weight of what she had done. Retribution lay broken on the tarmac, and in its wreckage was the truth she already understood. Heroism was never free. It came with a cost, one she had only begun to pay. The legend of the Devil's Angel spread faster than fire across dry grass. Within days, every pilot in theater had heard of Major Sophia Hale, the woman who had flown through the unyielding canyon and returned alive. The story carried with it awe and inspiration, but also danger, for when legends are born, others will try to follow them, and not all would find the same path through the fire. It began with Captain Derek Lawson, a skilled pilot, but one who believed that courage and reputation alone could equal preparation. He had studied the recordings of Sophia's run as though they were a manual, mapping her vectors, tracing her descent, memorizing every movement. What he did not see were the countless hours she had flown in secret, carving her instincts against canyon walls, teaching her hands to listen to the whispers of the wind. When Lawson entered a valley narrower than Devil's Throat, the crosswinds betrayed him. His wing clipped stone, his A-10 burst into flame. His wingman screamed over the radio, but there was no chute, no miracle, only wreckage scattered like ashes across the rocks. The news struck Sophia like a hammer. She sat in silence when Colonel Hayes delivered it, her hands trembling. The pilot had tried to be her and paid with his life. The guilt pressed in her chest, heavier than any metal could balance. She told Hayes she should be grounded, that others would try again and again until the sky claimed them all. Hayes shook his head, reminding her that she had saved lives, that she could not be held accountable for every choice made by those chasing shadows. But Sophia knew better. A flame once lit will always draw those who think themselves immune to the burn. The investigation came swiftly. The Pentagon convened a board of officers 3 floors beneath the earth, concrete walls pressing down like judgment itself. Sophia stood in dress blues, ribbons gleaming, her eyes hollow from 3 months of questioning. The charges laid before her were sharp and cold: disobeying direct orders, unauthorized flight operations, reckless endangerment. She did not deny them. Her voice was steady as she accepted full responsibility. If that made her guilty, then she was guilty. But then the door opened and a man in a dark suit entered with a case marked with stamps of highest secrecy. He laid out photographs on the table, images captured after her mission. They revealed the truth, beyond saving a single SEAL team. Her flight had torn apart a massive Taliban staging ground hidden in the mountains, weapon stockpiles, supply chains, and training camps disrupted. A planned offensive that could have killed hundreds of Americans had been shattered before it began. The room shifted as the weight of revelation sank in. What had seemed insubordination was revealed as a strike of strategic magnitude. The intelligence officer explained further. Sophia's flight data had already reshaped tactical doctrines, her methods adapted into new training programs, preventing the reckless mimicry that had killed Lawson. The board fell silent as General Emma Hawkins leaned forward, her tone softening. "All charges dismissed," she said, awarding Sophia the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism. The medal brought no joy. Sophia carried the names of Lawson and others who would never return. Their families bore the true cost of her legend. Yet within that burden lay clarity. If her path had inspired death, then she would shape it into a road to survival. She requested immediate return to flight status, not for glory, but to teach to ensure that those who followed understood the difference between courage and wisdom, between inspiration and preparation. 5 years later, Sophia stood before a classroom at the Air Force Weapons School. 30 young pilots filled the room, their flight suits crisp, their eyes burning with the hunger she once carried. She recognized the arrogance in their posture, the need to prove themselves against the sky. She dimmed the lights and played a recording. Helmet footage of a pilot diving into a valley, his breathing quick, his altitude falling. For a moment, the students leaned forward, expecting triumph. Instead, they watched fire bloom against stone. The screen went black, silence heavier than any lecture. Captain Marcus Bradley, she said, 26 years old, married, 2 children, he died trying to copy a mission he saw on video. 4 pilots in total had tried, for lives lost, not because they lacked courage, but because they mistook courage for preparation. She let their silence deepen. Then she showed them the twisted wreckage of her own A-10, reminding them how close she had come to being another ghost in the canyon. Flying is not about being fearless, she told them. Fear is your ally. It warns you when danger lurks. The enemy is ignorance. The mission in Devil's Throat was not a moment of luck. It was months of training when no one watched. Nights carving flight paths through shadowed canyons, learning to see what manuals never explained. Bradley died because he believed courage alone was enough. Her eyes locked with each of theirs. True heroism is not about chasing impossible missions for glory. It is about preparing so deeply that when the impossible comes, you are ready, not lucky. The class remained still, their bravado muted, their eyes carrying something closer to humility. As the room emptied, Sophia lingered, her gaze falling on the photograph of Bradley and his family. The legend of the Devil's Angel would continue to spread, whispered in bars and retold in hangars. But she knew her true victory was not surviving the impossible. It was ensuring that others could survive it too. Sophia Hale, the angel of Devil's Throat, carried not only the memory of what she had done, but the responsibility of what others might yet do. Her story had begun with a drunken bet in a neon-lit bar, but had grown into a lesson written in blood and fire, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that lesson was never forgotten.